If you ever hear something you weren't meant to, don't run. Pretend you belong. I learned that too late, standing in a ballroom worth more than my entire life, balancing a silver tray that felt heavier with every step I took across polished marble floors. The chandeliers above me dripped gold light like something sacred, and every woman in the room looked like she had stepped out of a magazine I could never afford. I wasn't supposed to be here, not really. I was just filling in for someone who called out sick, a last-minute shift that promised good tips and sore feet. My name is Maris Hale, and I serve drinks to people who don't notice me unless I spill something. That night, I noticed everything, especially him. Dominic Arvant stood near the center of the room, like gravity worked differently around him. 6'2", maybe more, shoulders sharp under a tailored black suit. Dark hair pushed back like he never had to rush a day in his life. People didn't just look at him. They adjusted themselves around him. Women leaned closer. Men spoke softer. Even the music seemed to lower its voice when he moved. I had heard whispers about him in the kitchen. Not gossip. Not exactly. More like warnings disguised as admiration. Owns half the city. Don't stare too long. Don't get noticed. I kept my eyes down. That was the rule. But rules get harder when curiosity starts pulling at you like a thread you shouldn't touch. I was passing the terrace doors when I heard voices that didn't match the laughter inside. Low. Controlled. Wrong for a party like this. I shouldn't have stopped. I know that now. But I did. Just for a second. Just long enough to hear numbers that didn't belong in casual conversation. Shipment. Timing. Payment. Words that felt sharp, even whispered. My grip tightened on the tray. My heart started beating in my throat. Then silence. Not natural silence. The kind that notices you noticing. I stepped back too quickly. My elbow brushed a glass. It wobbled, caught the light, and for a second I thought everything would shatter. But it didn't. I steadied it. I breathed. And I looked up. He was already watching me. Dominic Arvant. Across the room. Not surprised. Not confused. Just aware. Like he had been waiting to see who would make a mistake first. My chest tightened. I looked away immediately, but it was too late. Something had already shifted. I could feel it in the air, like the temperature dropped without anyone touching the thermostat. I told myself to move. To keep serving. To disappear back into the rhythm of polite smiles and quiet steps. But my hands wouldn't stop trembling. I kept thinking about those voices. About what I had heard. About the way his eyes locked onto mine like I had just stepped into a story I didn't understand. Then the music faltered. A small hiccup no one else seemed to notice. But I did. Because everything that night felt like it was holding its breath. And somehow, I knew I had just become part of it. The music stuttered once, then smoothed out like nothing had happened. But I felt it in my bones. That subtle shift that told me something behind the curtain had gone wrong. And I was still standing too close to the edge of it. I forced my hands steady and moved through the crowd, offering drinks, nodding politely, pretending I did not feel his gaze following me like a shadow I could not step out of. Every step felt measured, like I was walking across thin ice that might crack if I breathed too loudly. I told myself I was imagining it, that powerful men did not notice waitresses unless they made a scene, and I had done everything right. Almost everything. My mind kept replaying those voices on the terrace, the numbers, the tone, the way silence had dropped the moment I lingered too long. I should have walked away immediately. I should have kept my head down and my thoughts quiet. But it was too late for that kind of thinking now. A server brushed past me, whispering something about the scheduled singer running late, maybe not coming at all, and I nodded like it mattered to me. It should not have mattered. None of this should have mattered. Yet the air kept tightening around me, like the room was shrinking without anyone else noticing. I reached the edge of the ballroom and slipped behind a column, just for a second, just to breathe. My pulse was too fast, my chest too tight, like my body already knew something my mind was still trying to deny. That was when I heard it again. Not words this time. Movement. Quick. Controlled. Not the careless shuffle of guests in expensive shoes. This was different. Intentional. I peeked past the column, careful, slow, and saw two men in dark suits moving toward the back corridor near the stage. Their expressions were neutral, but their eyes were not. They were searching, not scanning the room like staff. Searching like they already knew what they were looking for. My stomach dropped. I stepped back immediately, pressing myself against the cold wall, my breath catching in my throat. They were not looking for a lost guest. They were looking for a mistake. And I had made one. I swallowed hard and tried to think, Really think, not panic. Panic would get me noticed. Panic would make me visible. I needed to be invisible again. I adjusted my uniform, picked up a fresh tray from a nearby station, and stepped back into the room like I belonged there, like nothing inside me was unraveling. Blend in. That was the only rule that mattered now. I walked toward the stage area, keeping my pace even, my expression neutral, but my eyes flicked toward the exits, measuring distance, counting steps, calculating options I did not understand. That was when the lights dimmed slightly, just enough to draw attention forward. A murmur spread through the crowd, confusion dressed as curiosity. The singer was not coming. I could hear it in the whispers. Something had changed. Something had gone off script. And then, without warning, one of the men I had seen earlier stepped closer to the stage, speaking quietly to the event coordinator, his presence enough to shift her entire posture. She nodded too quickly, too nervously. My grip tightened on the tray. This was not a coincidence. This was a setup. I felt it deep in my chest. My gaze drifted, unwilling but pulled, back to him. Dominic Arvent had not moved from his place, but everything around him had. His attention was no longer on the crowd. It was on the stage, waiting, anticipating, controlling something I could not see. And somehow, I knew, with a certainty that made my hands tremble again, that whatever happened next was going to involve me. The room shifted before anyone said a word, like the air itself understood something the guests did not, and I felt it settle against my skin, cold and deliberate, as if the night had chosen a direction and I was already standing in its path. I tried to keep moving, to let the rhythm of service carry me forward, but every instinct I had was screaming to stop, to hide, to disappear into a space where no one would think to look. The problem was that there was no such space anymore. Not for me. The coordinator's voice trembled as she spoke into a microphone, announcing a brief change in the program, her smile too tight to be convincing, her eyes flicking toward the same corner I had been avoiding. Toward him. Dominic Arvent did not need to speak to control a room. He only needed to decide something, and the rest followed like gravity. I watched as one of his men leaned close to the coordinator again, whispering something that made her nod quickly, almost gratefully, like she had been given an answer she did not question. My pulse climbed higher. This was not random. Nothing about this felt random. The singer was gone. The stage was empty, and something was about to fill that space. I took a step back, intending to retreat into the staff corridor, to put walls between me and whatever this was becoming, but a hand brushed my arm, light but intentional. I turned, heart jumping, and found one of the event staff looking at me with urgency I did not recognize. "You sing, right?" she asked quickly, her voice low but insistent. The question hit me like a physical force. I shook my head immediately, the answer automatic, protective. "Not here. Not now. Not ever again." "I used to," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. "Not anymore." She did not seem to hear the second part. "They need someone," she said, glancing toward the stage. "Just one song. Something simple. The guests are getting restless." I followed her gaze despite myself. The stage lights were already warming, soft gold spreading across an empty microphone stand, waiting for someone to step into it, waiting for a solution, waiting for a mistake. My chest tightened. This was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. I shook my head again, firmer this time. "I cannot. Find someone else. There has to be someone else." But even as I said it, I knew there was not. Not in the way they needed. Not in the way he wanted. Because this was not about entertainment anymore. This was about control. And control always had a purpose. The staff member leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than the request itself. "Please," she said. "It is just one song." I hesitated. 1 second too long. And in that second, I felt it again. That pull. That awareness. I looked up without meaning to. And there he was. Still across the room. Still perfectly still. Watching me. Not the stage. Not the guests. Me. Like he had already made the decision and was simply waiting for me to realize it. My breath caught. This was not an opportunity. This was a test. Or maybe a trap. I could not tell which was worse. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, my mind racing through every possible outcome. None of them good, none of them safe. If I refused, I would stand out. If I accepted, I would step directly into whatever game this was. Either way, I was already seen. Already chosen. The room felt smaller, the exits farther away, the noise fading into a dull hum behind the sound of my own heartbeat. I looked at the stage again, at the empty microphone, at the light waiting for someone brave enough or desperate enough to step into it. Then I looked back at him. Dominic Arvent did not nod. He did not smile. He did not move at all. But something in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. There was no neutral choice anymore. I exhaled slowly, setting the tray down with careful precision, like the smallest mistake might shatter more than glass this time. Fine, I said, the word barely louder than a breath. Just one song. The staff member nodded quickly, relief flashing across her face, but I barely noticed. Because as I stepped toward the stage, I realized something that made my pulse spike all over again. I was not doing this to help them. I was doing this to survive. And somewhere behind me, unseen but undeniable, the man who owned the night was already waiting to see what I would do next. The moment my foot touched the first step of the stage, the noise of the room shifted into something distant, like I had stepped underwater and everything above me continued without me, muffled and unreal, and for a second I almost turned back. But there was nowhere to go back to. Not anymore. The light hit my eyes as I reached the microphone, warm and blinding, forcing me to focus on the narrow space directly in front of me. I could feel every gaze in the room, some curious, some annoyed, some already dismissing me as temporary entertainment. But one gaze cut through all of it, sharp and unwavering. I did not need to look to know where he was. I could feel it like a weight against my spine. I wrapped my fingers around the microphone stand, grounding myself in something solid, something real, even as my pulse thundered in my ears. Breathe, I told myself. Just breathe. One song. That was all this was supposed to be. But nothing about this felt simple anymore. I closed my eyes for half a second, just enough to find the part of me I had buried years ago. The part that used to sing without fear. The part that believed music could hold a room together instead of exposing it. When I opened them again, the silence had settled fully. Waiting. Expecting. Testing. The first note came out softer than I intended, barely more than a thread of sound, but it held. It did not break. And then the second followed, steadier, stronger, building something I could lean on instead of collapse into. The room responded before I realized it. Conversations fading, movement slowing, attention shifting not because they were told to, but because they had no choice. I felt it happen in real time. The subtle pull of focus, the way people leaned in without knowing why. I kept my voice controlled, careful, not showing the tremor that still lived under my ribs, not letting them hear how close I was to losing control. This was not about perfection. This was about presence. About staying visible without becoming vulnerable. About buying time without anyone realizing that was what I was doing. My eyes moved once, just once, across the room, and found him. Dominic Arvent had not changed his posture, but something in his expression had shifted, something quieter, more focused, like he was no longer observing a distraction but studying a pattern he had not expected. His gaze did not waver. It held mine for a fraction too long, and I felt something tighten in my chest that had nothing to do with fear. I looked away first. I had to, because holding that gaze felt like stepping too far into something I could not control. The song moved forward, each note layering over the last, building a space that felt separate from the tension coiled beneath it. I could feel it now, the reason I had stepped up here, the fragile advantage of being in the open, in the light, where nothing could happen without being seen. It was the only protection I had, and I was using it. I saw a movement near the edge of the stage, subtle but deliberate. The same men, still searching, still scanning, but they hesitated now, just enough to tell me that the spotlight had changed the rules. I kept singing, kept breathing, kept holding the room together with something as simple and as dangerous as sound. Because if I stopped, if I faltered, if I gave them even a second of uncertainty, everything waiting beneath the surface would rise. The final note stretched, lingered, then faded into a silence that felt heavier than before. Not empty. Full. Charged. I lowered my hand slowly from the stand, my fingers no longer trembling, my body still but my mind racing. For one moment, nothing moved. And then the applause came. Controlled. Polite. But real. I stepped back from the microphone, every instinct telling me to leave immediately, to disappear before anything else could happen. But I did not move fast enough. Because he already was. Dominic Arvent stepped forward through the crowd, not rushed, not hesitant, just inevitable. And as the distance between us closed, I understood something with a clarity that made my breath catch again. The song had not ended anything. It had only begun something I could no longer step away from. Applause filled the room, but it felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. Not to me. Not to the moment that had just unfolded under the weight of 100 watching eyes and one that mattered more than all of them combined. I stepped back from the microphone, forcing my breathing to stay even, forcing my expression into something neutral, something that did not reveal how tightly my chest was coiled. Leave, I told myself. Now, before anything else changes. Before he reaches you. I turned slightly, ready to step down, but the path was already gone. The crowd had shifted, subtly but effectively, closing the space in front of the stage without appearing to do so. Not chaos. Not pressure. Just control. I felt it instantly. This was not coincidence. This was design. My pulse spiked again, sharp and immediate. I did not need to search for him. I knew exactly where he was. And when I looked, he was already closer. Dominic Arvent moved through the room without hurry, but nothing slowed him either. People made space before he reached them, like they sensed something inevitable approaching and chose not to stand in its way. His gaze never left me. Not once. I stayed where I was, because stepping back would look like retreat, and retreat would make me smaller, weaker, easier to corner. I had made it this far by staying visible. I could not change that now. He stopped at the base of the stage, just below me, close enough that I could see the detail in his expression, the control in every line of his face, the way nothing about him felt accidental. For a second, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable, not uncertain, just deliberate. Then he tilted his head slightly, studying me like I was something he had not expected to find. "You were not on the program," he said, his voice low enough that only I could hear, but clear enough that every word landed exactly where it was meant to. I swallowed, steadying myself before answering. "No," I said, keeping my tone even. I was filling in. His eyes held mine, searching, measuring, like he was testing the truth of what I said without needing proof. "Filling in," he repeated quietly, as if the phrase itself was not enough. Then his gaze shifted briefly, not away from me, but past me, scanning the edges of the room with a precision that made my stomach tighten again. When his attention returned, it was sharper, more focused. "What else were you filling in for tonight, Maris Hale?" The sound of my name in his voice sent a cold line down my spine. I had not told him. No one had, which meant he already knew more than I did. I kept my expression steady, even as my thoughts raced. "Just the song," I said carefully. "Nothing else." His lips curved slightly, not quite a smile, more like acknowledgement. "You stepped into the light at exactly the right moment," he said, his tone unreadable. "That is rarely accidental." I did not answer immediately, because anything I said now could become something else in his hands. Something useful. Something dangerous. "I did not plan this," I said finally, choosing each word with care. "It just happened." His gaze did not soften, but something shifted behind it, something quieter, more interested than before. "Nothing just happens in my rooms," he said. "Not like that." The words were not a threat. Not exactly. But they carried weight all the same. I held his gaze, refusing to look away this time, even though everything in me warned against it. "Then maybe your room changed for a second," I said, my voice softer now, but steady. For the first time, there was a pause. Not long, not obvious, but enough to tell me I had said something he had not expected. The air between us felt different now. Not safer, but clearer. He stepped closer, just one step, enough to close the last bit of distance without touching me, without crossing a line he did not need to cross. "You heard something you were not meant to hear," he said quietly. It was not a question. My breath caught, just for a second, but I recovered quickly, holding my ground. "I heard music," I replied, keeping my voice calm. "That is all." His eyes searched mine again, deeper this time, like he was looking for something beneath the surface, something I had not said. And then, slowly, he nodded. "For now," he said. The words settled between us like a promise and a warning at the same time. He stepped back just enough to break the tension, but not the connection. Then he turned slightly, addressing the room again without raising his voice, without needing to. "The night continues," he said simply. And just like that, the music resumed, the conversations returned, The illusion of normalcy rebuilt itself around us. But nothing felt the same. Not anymore. Because as I stepped down from the stage, I realized something I could not ignore. He had not dismissed me. He had marked me. And whatever came next would not be something I could step away from on my own. I should have walked away the second the music started again. Should have disappeared into the quiet machinery of service where no one looks twice. But my feet moved slower than my thoughts, like something invisible was holding me in place just long enough to make leaving impossible. The stage behind me still felt warm, like it had left something on my skin, something I could not shake even as I stepped back into the crowd. Conversations resumed, laughter returned, glasses clinked, and yet every sound felt slightly off, like the room was performing normal instead of being it. I picked up a tray from a passing server, more out of instinct than necessity, something to keep my hands occupied, something to make me look like I belonged again. Blend in. That was still the goal. But blending in after being seen like that was a different kind of challenge. I moved carefully between guests, keeping my head level, my expression neutral, but I could feel the shift in their attention. Not all of them. Not most. But enough. A glance that lingered too long. A whisper that stopped when I passed. Recognition, or curiosity, or something in between. I kept walking. Kept serving, kept pretending that nothing had changed. But everything had. I felt it most in the spaces between movements, in the quiet seconds where nothing happened, and yet everything felt like it might. My eyes flicked toward the terrace without meaning to. The doors were closed now. The voices gone. But the memory remained, sharp and clear, like it had carved something permanent into the night. I forced myself to look away. Do not think about it. Do not replay it. Do not let it show. I turned toward the service corridor, intending to disappear for a minute, to find somewhere I could breathe without being watched. But as I stepped into the narrower space behind the ballroom, the air changed again. Quieter, colder, more real. The hum of the event faded behind me, replaced by the soft echo of footsteps and distant voices that did not belong to guests. I slowed instinctively, my senses sharpening without permission. This was not where I should be. Not now. Not after everything. I took another step, then stopped. Someone was there. Not directly in front of me, not close enough to touch, but present in a way that filled the space before I could see them. My breath caught, my grip tightening slightly on the tray as I turned. One of the men from earlier stood near the end of the corridor, his posture relaxed, but his presence anything but casual. He was not looking at me like a stranger. He was looking at me like a question already half answered. For a second, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched, thin and deliberate. Then he stepped aside, just enough to clear the path, but not enough to make it feel like an invitation. More like a direction. My pulse climbed again, sharp and immediate. I understood without being told. This was not random. This was not optional. I could turn around. I could walk back into the noise and pretend I had taken a wrong turn. But I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my chest, that it would not change anything. I had already been seen. Already been marked. Already been chosen. I exhaled slowly, steadying myself, then moved forward. Each step felt heavier than it should have, like I was crossing an invisible line I would not be able to step back over. The man did not follow me. He did not need to. The message was clear enough. I reached the end of the corridor and turned the corner. And there he was. Dominic Arvent stood near the far wall, away from the noise, away from the eyes of the room, exactly where he would need to be if he wanted a conversation no one else could hear. He did not look surprised to see me. He did not greet me. He simply watched, the same controlled stillness from before, but sharper now, more focused, like the performance was over and whatever came next would not be for anyone else. I stopped a few feet away, close enough to speak, far enough to leave space between us. The silence returned, heavier this time, carrying something unspoken but undeniable. You left the stage quickly, he said finally, his voice low, steady, like the rest of the world did not exist beyond this corridor. I met his gaze, refusing to let my hesitation show. I had already stayed longer than I should have, I replied. His eyes did not move. And yet you did not leave, he said. Not a question, a statement. I held his gaze, choosing my next words carefully, aware that every answer mattered more than it should. I am still working, I said, lifting the tray slightly as if that explained everything. For a moment, nothing changed. Then, slowly, Almost imperceptibly, something in his expression shifted. Not softer, not warmer, just clearer. You are not here to serve drinks anymore, Maris, he said quietly. The words settled into the space between us with a weight that felt impossible to ignore. My pulse stuttered, just for a second. Then I steadied it again. Then why am I here? I asked, my voice calm, even as my chest tightened. His gaze held mine, unblinking, certain. Because you stayed, he said. And that was the wrong move. The words settled between us like something irreversible, quiet but absolute. And for the first time since I stepped onto that stage, I felt the full weight of where I was standing, not just in the building, but in his world. I did not move. I did not step back. Because stepping back would mean admitting I had already lost control of something I never understood to begin with. I held his gaze, steady on the surface, even as my thoughts raced beneath it, searching for something I could still hold on to. Then I should have left earlier, I said, my voice even, but softer now, like I was testing the space between us. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes sharpened, like he was listening more closely than before. Yes, he said, you should have. The simplicity of the answer made it heavier, not lighter. No anger, no accusation, just fact. And facts were harder to argue with. I exhaled slowly, letting the silence stretch just enough to think. If I leave now, I said carefully, does that fix it? For a brief second, something almost like amusement flickered across his face, gone as quickly as it appeared. No, he said. It tells me you understand the situation. That is useful. Useful. The word landed differently than I expected. Not threatening. Not comforting. Just precise. I tilted my head slightly, studying him the way he had been studying me, trying to read something beyond what he was willing to show. And if I did not understand, I asked. His gaze did not waver. Then we would be having a different conversation, he said quietly. The air shifted again, not colder, but clearer, like something had just been defined without needing to be explained. I felt my pulse steady, not because the situation had improved, but because I finally understood part of the rules. This was not about fear. Not entirely. This was about awareness. About how quickly I could adapt to something I had never been meant to see. I lowered the tray slightly, no longer pretending it was the reason I was standing here. You said I stayed, I said, keeping my voice calm. So what happens now? He watched me for a long moment, silent, assessing, like he was weighing something that did not have a simple answer. Then he took a step closer, not enough to invade, but enough to narrow the space between us until it felt intentional. Now, he said, you decide how much trouble you are in. The statement caught me off guard, not because of what it implied, but because of how it was framed. Choice. He was giving me a choice. Or at least the illusion of one. I held his gaze, letting the words settle, letting myself think before reacting. That depends on what you think I heard, I said finally. A small risk, but not reckless. Something in his expression shifted again, not approval, not surprise, but recognition. You are careful, he said. That is good. His eyes moved briefly, scanning the corridor behind me, then returned just as quickly. The night is not finished yet, he continued. And there are still people here who do not belong in it. The meaning was clear without needing detail. The terrace, the voices, the men searching earlier. This was still unfolding. I felt it tighten again in my chest, that sense that the night had layers I had only just begun to see. And you think I am one of them, I said quietly. His answer came without hesitation. I think you are someone who stepped into something without knowing the cost, he said. That makes you unpredictable. And unpredictable things tend to attract attention. Attention from you, I asked. His gaze held mine, steady, deliberate. Yes. The honesty of it was almost more disarming than anything else he had said. No manipulation. No deflection. Just truth, delivered without decoration. I nodded slowly, absorbing it, adjusting to it, letting it settle into something I could work with instead of fear. Then I should be careful what I do next, I said. For the first time, his expression shifted in a way that felt almost like approval. Exactly, he said. The word was quiet, but it carried more weight than anything else. He stepped back then, just enough to ease the pressure of the space, but not enough to break the connection entirely. Stay where you can be seen, he added, his tone lower now. It is safer that way. The advice landed harder than it should have, because it confirmed what I had already started to understand. The stage had not been a coincidence. It had been protection. I nodded once, a small, controlled movement. Understood, I said. His gaze lingered for a moment longer, like he was committing something to memory. Then he turned slightly, his attention shifting back toward the ballroom beyond the corridor. I should go back, I said, though it felt less like a statement and more like a question now. You should, he replied. And Maris? I paused, just before turning away. Yes. Do not try to disappear again tonight, he said quietly. You are far more visible than you think. I held his gaze for one last second, then turned and walked back toward the noise, the light, the performance of normal that no longer felt convincing. But this time, I did not try to blend in. Because now I knew something I had not known before. Being seen was not the danger. Not tonight. Not yet. The danger was not understanding why. The ballroom swallowed me again the moment I stepped out of the corridor, the music wrapping around my senses like nothing had happened, like the past few minutes had not shifted the ground beneath my feet in ways I could not undo. I did not rush. I did not hesitate. I moved exactly the way I had before, measured and quiet, carrying nothing in my hands now because I no longer needed the excuse. He had told me to stay visible. So I did. I walked through the center of the room instead of along the edges, letting the light touch me again, letting the attention come instead of avoiding it. It felt wrong at first, like stepping into a spotlight without permission, but then something inside me adjusted, steadied, adapted. If I was already seen, then hiding would only make me stand out more. Conversations dipped when I passed, not dramatically, but enough for me to notice. Eyes followed for a second longer than before. Not recognition exactly, but curiosity sharpened by the memory of the stage. I kept my expression calm, my pace even, my posture straight, holding on to the smallest details that made me look like I belonged in a way that could not be questioned. The room was not as seamless as it had been earlier. Now that I knew what to look for, I could see the fractures beneath it. Subtle shifts in position. Small exchanges of glances that carried more meaning than words. Men in suits who were not part of the event staff, but moved like they owned the space between seconds. His men. I did not look directly at them, but I tracked their movement through reflection, through peripheral vision, through instinct. They were not searching blindly anymore. They were narrowing something down. And that meant the night was moving forward, whether I wanted it to or not. I drifted closer to the bar, not to hide, but to anchor myself somewhere that made sense, somewhere I could pause without drawing attention. The bartender gave me a brief look, curious but not intrusive, then returned to his work. I leaned lightly against the counter, keeping my breathing steady, my thoughts sharper now, more focused. Dominic had not told me everything, but he had told me enough. Stay visible. It is safer that way. The words echoed quietly in my mind, aligning with what I was seeing now. Movement slowed near the edges of the room. Not stopped. Controlled. Managed. Whatever had started earlier was still unfolding, but it was being contained. Carefully. Precisely. I let my gaze lift slightly, just enough to find him again. Dominic Arvent stood where he always seemed to stand. Not hidden, not exposed, simply present in a way that made everything else arrange itself around him. But this time, he was not still. His attention moved. Briefly. Deliberately. Directing something I could not hear, but could feel. A man near the terrace shifted position after a single glance from him. Another stepped back, opening space that had not been there a second before. It was like watching a silent conversation unfold in real time, one where every movement meant something and nothing was wasted. I felt it then, clearer than before. This was not chaos. This was control correcting itself. The realization settled into me with a strange kind of calm. I was not in the middle of something unpredictable. I was standing inside something carefully managed. And that meant there were rules. Patterns. Boundaries I could learn if I paid attention. My fingers brushed lightly against the edge of the bar as I straightened, pushing myself away from it, moving again before I could become stationary long enough to draw attention. I passed a group of guests who were laughing too loudly, their conversation shallow, disconnected from everything happening beneath the surface. For a moment, I envied them, their ignorance, their safety, but that thought faded quickly, because I was no longer part of that world. Not tonight. As I crossed the room again, I felt it before I saw it. A shift. Small, but immediate. One of the men near the corridor earlier had changed direction. Not abruptly, smoothly, but directly toward me. My pulse reacted instantly, sharp but controlled, my breathing steady even as my awareness sharpened again. Do not panic. Do not run. Stay visible. I kept walking, adjusting my path just enough to remain in the open, in the light, where everything could be seen. The man slowed slightly as I did, matching distance without closing it. Not approaching, not leaving, watching, confirming. I did not look at him directly, but I felt the weight of his attention, the quiet calculation behind it. And then, just as quickly, it shifted away. His focus moved past me, towards something else, something beyond my line of sight. I did not turn immediately. I did not react. I kept walking. But something in the air changed again, subtle but undeniable. The tension that had been tightening all night did not disappear. It redirected. I followed the movement with my eyes, careful, controlled, and saw it. Near the far end of the room, just beyond the terrace doors, two men stood too close, their posture too still, their attention too fixed. Not guests, not staff, something else, something that did not belong. And then I saw Dominic move. Not fast, not obvious, but intentional. One step, then another. The room adjusted around him again, like it always did. And in that moment, I understood something that settled deep and certain in my chest. The night was reaching its turning point. And somehow, without meaning to, I was still exactly where I needed to be to see it happen. The shift in the room was no longer subtle, no longer something only I could feel. It moved through the crowd like a ripple under calm water, quiet but undeniable. And for the first time, a few guests began to notice that something was not quite right. I slowed my steps, not stopping, just enough to stay aligned with the movement unfolding ahead, my eyes fixed on the far end of the room where the tension had gathered into something visible. The two men near the terrace had not moved, but everything around them had. The space tightening, the angles changing, the invisible lines closing in without a single raised voice. Dominic Arvent continued forward, each step controlled, unhurried, but absolute, like the outcome had already been decided, and the only thing left was the moment it would reveal itself. I felt my pulse steady in response, not because I was calm, but because clarity had replaced confusion. This was the turning point. Not loud, not chaotic, precise, intentional. I adjusted my path slightly, positioning myself where I could see without being directly involved, where the light still reached but did not center on me. Stay visible. I remembered. So I did. A server passed behind me, whispering something to another, their voices tight with a tension they did not understand, and I realized I was no longer the only one sensing the shift. But they did not know what to look for. I did. My gaze stayed fixed as Dominic closed the distance, his presence drawing the attention of the two men without effort. One of them straightened slightly, his posture changing in a way that revealed recognition, or perhaps concern, while the other remained still, too still, like he was waiting for something that had already gone wrong. No one spoke at first. The music continued, soft and elegant, completely disconnected from the moment building beneath it. Conversations nearby slowed, then stopped, as awareness spread outward in small, controlled waves. I felt it in the silence between breaths, in the way the room held itself just a fraction tighter. Dominic stopped a few feet from them, close enough to command the space, far enough to leave no doubt that this distance was chosen, not accidental. He said something then, too low for me to hear, but the effect was immediate. The man on the left shifted his weight, a flicker of something uncertain crossing his face before it disappeared behind a practiced calm. The second man did not respond right away. That hesitation said more than any words could have. My fingers curled slightly at my sides, not from fear, but from the intensity of watching something so controlled unfold without any visible force. It was not about confrontation. It was about exposure. I realized that now. Whatever had started earlier was reaching its conclusion, not with noise, but with precision. One of Dominic's men stepped closer, not abruptly, not aggressively, just enough to close another invisible line. Then another, positioning himself near the edge of the terrace doors, cutting off an exit that no one else would notice was no longer available. The two men at the center of it all exchanged a glance, brief but telling, and in that second, everything shifted again. Not outward, inward, like a decision had been made without needing to be spoken. Dominic did not move. He did not need to. The room was already aligned with him. I felt a strange sense of stillness settle over me, like I had stepped outside the moment even while standing inside it. This was what control looked like when it did not need to prove itself. The music continued. The lights remained warm. The guests watched without fully understanding what they were seeing. And yet, the outcome was already written into the space between them. One of the men finally spoke, his voice low, controlled, but edged with something I could not quite place from this distance. Dominic listened without interruption, his expression unchanged, his posture unshaken. When the man finished, there was a pause. A long one. Then Dominic inclined his head slightly, a movement so small it might have been missed by anyone not paying attention. But I saw it, and so did everyone who mattered. The man's shoulders dropped just enough to give it away. Not defeat. Acceptance. Whatever this was, it was over. Not loudly, not publicly, but completely. The second man exhaled slowly, his gaze dropping for a fraction of a second before lifting again, his composure returning in a way that looked practiced, rehearsed, controlled. Dominic stepped back then, not retreating, but releasing the space he had claimed, signaling the end of something that had never needed to escalate. His men adjusted instantly, their positions loosening, their presence blending back into the room like they had never been separate from it. The tension dissolved, not gone, but redirected, absorbed into the rhythm of the night once more. Conversations resumed, hesitant at first, then stronger, louder, as if the room was trying to convince itself that nothing had happened at all. I stayed where I was, my breathing steady, my mind sharper than it had been all night. Because I understood now. This was not chaos. This was control correcting itself. And I had just watched it happen from a place I was never meant to stand. My eyes lifted again, searching without thinking, and found him. Dominic Arvent was already looking at me. Not surprised, not questioning, just aware. Like he had known exactly where I would be when this ended. And in that moment, something settled into place inside me with quiet certainty. I was no longer just someone who had seen too much. I was someone he had allowed to see it. The moment our eyes met again, I understood something had changed, not in the room, not in the outcome of whatever had just unfolded, but in the way he was looking at me now, like I was no longer an accident in his night, but a variable he had decided to keep. I did not look away this time. I held his gaze, steady, controlled, letting the silence stretch between us across the distance, even as the noise of the room rebuilt itself around that moment. Conversations rose again, laughter returned, glasses clinked, but it all felt like a surface layer now, something thin covering what I had already seen beneath. Dominic did not move immediately. He remained where he was, finishing something unspoken with the men in front of him, but his attention was split now, part of it still anchored on me, like he was tracking my position without needing to turn fully. I felt it as clearly as if he had reached out and touched my shoulder. I shifted slightly, not retreating, not advancing, just adjusting my stance to remain in the open space he had told me to hold. Stay where you can be seen. It is safer that way. The words carried more meaning now, because I had seen what happened to those who were not where they were supposed to be. Not punished, not exposed, simply corrected, quietly, completely. I let out a slow breath, steadying myself as I moved again, crossing the room at an even pace, not avoiding attention, not seeking it, just existing within it in a way that felt deliberate now. My eyes stayed aware, tracking movement, reading shifts, understanding patterns that had been invisible to me only an hour ago. This was not just a party. It was a system. And tonight, I had stepped inside it. A woman brushed past me, smiling too brightly, her perfume sharp and expensive, her attention already moving on before I could return the gesture. To her, I was still just part of the service. To others, I was something else now. I could feel the difference. And I knew he could too. I slowed near the center of the room, just enough to keep my position clear, my visibility constant, then stopped briefly beside a column, not hiding, just anchoring myself again. My thoughts moved faster now, sharper, piecing together everything I had seen, everything I had heard, everything he had said. You stayed. That was the wrong move. The sentence echoed in my mind, but it no longer felt like a warning. It felt like a statement of fact that I had already adapted to, because I had stayed. And now I understood why that mattered. My gaze lifted again, drawn back to him without effort. Dominic had stepped away from the terrace, his conversation finished, his attention returning fully to the room, to control, to presence, to whatever came next. But when his eyes found mine again, there was something different there. Not softer, not warmer, just certain, like a decision had already been made. My pulse reacted, quick but contained, as he started moving again. This time, there was no interruption, no diversion, no shift in direction. He was walking straight toward me. The distance between us shortened with every step, the space adjusting around him the way it always did, people moving without realizing why, paths clearing without question. I did not step back. I did not move at all. I stayed exactly where I was, exactly where he had told me to be, visible. When he reached me, he did not stop immediately. He closed the distance fully, stepping into my space in a way that was not aggressive, but not distant either. Close enough that I could see the detail in his eyes, the control behind them, the calculation that never fully disappeared. You watched, he said quietly, his voice low enough that it did not carry beyond us. Not a question. I nodded once. Yes. He studied me for a second longer, like he was confirming something against what he had already expected. Most people look away, he said. I held his gaze, steady. Most people do not know what they are looking at, I replied. A small pause followed. Not tension, not silence, something in between. Then, slowly, his expression shifted again, just enough to register. Awareness meeting awareness. That is true, he said. The simplicity of the agreement settled something between us that had not been there before. Not trust, not safety, but clarity. He stepped slightly to the side, not leaving, just changing the angle between us, like he was no longer approaching, but standing with me instead of across from me. Then you understand more than you should, he continued. I did not answer immediately, because that much was already clear. I understand enough to know I should not be here, I said finally. His gaze remained steady. And yet you are, he replied. The words landed quietly, but they carried weight all the same. I exhaled slowly, feeling the truth of that settle deeper than anything else. I am, I said. Another pause. Then, without breaking eye contact, he added, that means you are no longer just passing through. My pulse tightened slightly at that, not from fear, but from the realization of what he was saying without saying it directly. I held his gaze, searching for something in it that might soften the meaning. There was nothing, only certainty. Then what am I asked, my voice lower now, steadier than I felt. His answer came without hesitation. Someone I need to keep in sight, he said. The words were simple, but they changed everything. The words did not hit me all at once. They settled slowly, like something heavy finding its place, and I felt the shift not in the room, not in the air, but somewhere deeper, somewhere I could not ignore or undo. Someone I need to keep in sight. I held his gaze, steady on the surface, even as my thoughts moved faster beneath it, testing the edges of what he meant and what he was not saying. That is not the same as wanting me here, I said quietly. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes sharpened, like he appreciated the distinction more than he expected. No, he replied. It is not. The honesty in that answer should have unsettled me. Instead, it grounded me, because there was no illusion left to hide behind. This was not about interest, not in the way the room understood it. This was about necessity. I nodded slightly, absorbing that, adjusting to it, letting it become something I could work with instead of resist. Then I should be careful not to step out of your sight, I said. A small pause followed, just long enough to register the shift in tone. You should be careful regardless, he corrected. His voice remained low, controlled, but there was something else in it now, something closer to warning than instruction. The night may look settled, but it is not finished. I glanced briefly toward the far end of the room, where the earlier tension had unfolded and then disappeared, absorbed back into the surface of the event. It looks finished to them, I said. His gaze followed mine for a fraction of a second, then returned. They are not the ones it concerns, he replied. The clarity of that statement settled into me without resistance. Of course they were not. They never were. I exhaled slowly, letting my shoulders relax just enough to keep my posture natural, not defensive, not rigid. And me, I asked, am I one of the ones it concerns? His answer came without hesitation. Yes. The simplicity of it left no space for interpretation. I studied him for a moment longer, searching for something beneath that certainty, something that might explain why. Why me? Why now? but his expression offered nothing more than what he had already given. Then I need to understand the rules, I said. The words felt deliberate, measured, like I was stepping into something I could not step out of again. His gaze held mine, steady, assessing, and for the first time, there was something that felt almost like approval in the way he looked at me. That is a better question, he said. He shifted slightly, angling his body so we were no longer facing each other directly, but standing side by side, both of us looking out at the room instead of at each other. It changed the dynamic instantly. Less confrontation, more alignment. You stay visible, he said. That does not change. I nodded once. Understood. You do not repeat anything you heard, he continued. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. Not to anyone. His tone remained even, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. I felt my pulse tighten, not from fear, but from the recognition of what he was asking, or what he was requiring. I was not planning to, I said. His gaze shifted briefly toward me, then back to the room. Good, he replied, because that is the only reason you are still standing here like this. The words were quiet, calm, but they landed with precision. I absorbed them without reacting outwardly, letting them settle into something firm and unshakable. I understood now, not just the situation, the balance of it. I nodded again, slower this time. Then I will not give you a reason to change that, I said. A faint shift crossed his expression again, something that registered as acknowledgement more than anything else. That would be wise, he said. The music swelled slightly around us, a new song replacing the last, the rhythm pulling the room back into its performance of normalcy. But I no longer saw it the same way. I saw the spaces between it, the structure beneath it, the control holding it together, and him, standing at the center of it without ever needing to claim it. I glanced at him again, just for a second. And after tonight, I asked quietly, what happens then? This time, he did not answer immediately. His gaze remained on the room, his expression unreadable, his posture unchanged. The pause stretched longer than any before it. Then, finally, he spoke. That depends on whether tonight is the end of your involvement, he said, or the beginning of it. The words settled into me slowly, heavier than anything else he had said so far. Because this time, it was not just about the night. It was about what came after. I felt my breath steady, my mind sharpening again, adjusting to a possibility I had not allowed myself to consider. I did not answer right away, because I was not sure I had one yet. And something told me he already knew that. He turned his head slightly then, just enough to look at me again, his gaze steady, certain, like he was waiting, but not expecting. Then think carefully, Maris, he said quietly. Because once this night ends, you do not go back to not knowing. The words lingered long after he said them, not loud, not forceful, but impossible to ignore, like something had been set in motion that no longer needed his voice to continue. Once this night ends, you do not go back to not knowing. I stood still beside him, my gaze on the room, but my focus turned inward, tracing the weight of that truth as it settled deeper with every passing second. He was right. There was no version of tonight where I walked away unchanged. Not after what I had seen. Not after what I now understood. The music carried on, soft and elegant, wrapping around the edges of the moment like it was trying to smooth it over, but I could still feel the sharp lines beneath it. The structure, the control, the quiet decisions that shaped everything without being seen. And him, standing at the center of it, not claiming attention, but holding it all the same. I exhaled slowly, steadying myself, letting my thoughts align with something clearer, something more certain. Then I turned my head slightly, just enough to meet his gaze again. You already decided, I said quietly. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes acknowledged the statement. About me. About this. He studied me for a moment, then responded with the same calm certainty he had shown all night. I decided you would not be ignored, he said. The distinction mattered. I felt it immediately. Not chosen, not claimed, not yet, but not dismissed either. I nodded once, absorbing that, understanding the space I now occupied in his world. Then I decide what that means next, I said. A small pause followed, not hesitation, but consideration. Yes, he replied. You do. The simplicity of it felt heavier than anything else. Because for the first time, the direction of this night was not entirely in his control. Not anymore. Not where I was concerned. I turned my gaze back to the room, watching the movement, the rhythm, the carefully maintained illusion that everything was exactly as it should be. But now I saw the difference. I saw where the lines were drawn, where they could shift, where they held, and I understood something I had not before. I had not just been caught in this. I had adapted to it. Quickly, without being told how. My fingers relaxed at my sides, the tension I had carried earlier replaced by something steadier, something sharper. Then I made the decision before I could second-guess it. I am not going to pretend I did not see anything, I said quietly. His gaze returned to me immediately, sharper now, more focused. I met it without hesitation. I am not going to talk about it either, I added. But I am not going to act like I do not understand what tonight was. The silence between us shifted, heavier now, but not hostile. Something closer to evaluation. He watched me carefully, like he was measuring not just my words, but the way I held them. You are choosing awareness, he said. I am choosing not to be blind, I replied. The correction came naturally, without force. His expression did not soften, but something in it changed again, something that felt closer to recognition than anything before. That is more dangerous, he said quietly. I held his gaze, steady. For me or for you? This time, the pause was longer. Not uncertainty. Something deeper. Then he answered. For anyone who underestimates you, he said. The words settled into me with a quiet finality that felt different from everything else that had been said tonight. Not a warning. Not a threat. Something else. Something closer to acknowledgement. I nodded once, accepting it without needing to respond further. The music shifted again, the tempo changing, the room adjusting with it, the night moving forward as if nothing had interrupted it at all. But I knew better now. And so did he. After tonight, I said quietly, my gaze returning to the crowd, I walk out of here. His answer came just as calmly. Yes, you do. I felt my breath steady, my posture relax just slightly. And you let me. Another small pause. Then, simply, yes. The certainty in his voice left no room for doubt. But it did not erase the question that followed it. Why? I turned back to him, the word unspoken but clear in my expression. He saw it. Of course he did. Because you stayed visible, he said. And because you understood the difference between seeing and speaking. The answer was precise, measured, but there was something beneath it I could not fully define. Something that suggested this was not the end of the decision, just the beginning of it. I held his gaze for one last second, then nodded slowly. Then I will leave knowing exactly what I saw, I said. His eyes remained on mine, steady, certain. And knowing exactly who saw you see it, he replied. The words landed with quiet impact. Not a warning. Not a promise. Something in between. I turned then, not abruptly, not hesitantly, just with intention, stepping back into the flow of the room, the light, the music, the illusion that everything was as it had been. But as I moved away, I felt it clearly, undeniably. This night was not something I was leaving behind. It was something I was carrying with me. And somewhere behind me, without needing to turn, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. He was still watching. Not to stop me. Not to follow, but to remember. I did not look back immediately, not because I was afraid of what I would see, but because I already knew, and somehow that certainty felt heavier than any confirmation could have been. The ballroom stretched out in front of me exactly as it had before, warm lights, polished floors, laughter that sounded effortless, but none of it felt the same now. I moved through it with a different awareness, not trying to blend in anymore, not trying to disappear, just moving with intention, like I understood the rhythm I had stepped into. Each step carried me closer to the exit, but it did not feel like leaving. It felt like crossing a line I would not be able to uncross. The doors stood open ahead, framed in gold and glass, leading back to a world that suddenly felt smaller than it had just hours ago. A staff member passed me, offering a polite smile, unaware of anything beyond the surface of the night. I returned it without thinking, but it felt distant, like I was already somewhere else in my mind. I reached the edge of the room and paused for a second, not long enough to draw attention, just long enough to take one last breath of the air inside. It carried music, perfume, something sharper beneath it that I could not name. Control. That was the word. I stepped forward. The transition was immediate. The hallway outside was quieter, cooler, the noise of the ballroom closing behind me like a door sealing something in place. My heels echoed softly against the floor as I walked, each step grounding me back into something real, something separate from what I had just experienced. I should have felt relief. I did not. Instead, there was a strange sense of clarity, like everything had sharpened instead of fading. I pushed through the final set of doors and stepped out into the night air. The city greeted me with its usual rhythm, distant traffic, muted voices, the low hum of something always moving. It should have felt normal. It did not. I stood there for a moment, letting the cool air settle against my skin, letting the quiet wrap around me in a way the ballroom never could. But even here, outside of it, I could still feel it. The structure, the awareness, the fact that something had shifted and was not going to shift back. I started walking, not rushing, just moving forward because standing still felt like the wrong choice. The streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement, stretching and narrowing as I passed beneath them. My reflection caught briefly in a dark window, and for a second, I stopped. I looked the same. Same dress, same posture, same face, but something behind my eyes had changed. I could see it clearly, and once you see something like that, you cannot unsee it. I exhaled slowly and turned away, continuing down the sidewalk, letting the distance grow between me and the building behind me. But distance did not feel like separation. It felt like extension, like whatever had started and there was not contained by walls or doors. It moved with me now. A car passed, its headlights briefly illuminating the street, then fading into the distance. I kept walking. My mind replayed pieces of the night, not in confusion, but in order, like I was cataloging something important without meaning to. The terrace, the voices, the stage, the silence, his gaze, his words. You do not go back to not knowing. He had not said it as a threat. He had said it as a fact, and he had been right. I reached the corner and paused again, waiting for the light to change, my fingers brushing lightly against my side, grounding myself in something physical. The city moved around me, unaware, unchanged. But I was not. The light shifted. I stepped forward, and for a brief second, without meaning to, I felt it again. That awareness, that quiet sense of being seen, not watched, not followed, just known. I did not turn around. I did not need to, because I understood now. He was not the kind of man who needed to follow to keep track of something. If he chose to remember you, you stayed remembered. I reached the other side of the street and kept walking, the distance growing, the night stretching ahead of me. But the feeling did not fade. It settled, quiet, certain, like something had been marked, not claimed, not controlled, but recognized. I slowed slightly, my breath steady, my thoughts clear, and for the first time since I stepped into that ballroom, I allowed myself to acknowledge the truth I had been circling all along. I had walked in as someone passing through. I had walked out as someone who had been seen. And somewhere behind me, in a room that looked like nothing had happened, a man who controlled everything without raising his voice had made one quiet decision that would follow me long after the night ended. Not to stop me, not to hold me, but to remember me. And somehow, that felt like the beginning of something far more dangerous than anything I had faced inside those walls.